Okay, as you can see, the cockpit is a basic VFR layout. Again, this airplane was used in the bush, so everything was in consideration of weight. So we don't really have any unnecessary items in the cockpit. Basically, we have our manifold pressure gauges, RPM tachometers for left and right engine. This is our vacuum gauge. When the engines start, these little red balls will pull in, and so if you had a vacuum failure, you would have one of these little red balls pop out telling you that you either lost your left or your right vacuum pump. Coming down the line, we have our oil temperature gauges, oil pressure gauges, and fuel pressure. This is a cluster gauge. And basically, under normal operations, you're looking for like an upside down Y. It doesn't look like it now, but under normal operating temperatures, when this needle is up here in the middle, up around 50 or so, and these oil pressure and fuel pressure indicating it kind of looks like an upside down Y. We have these carburetor air temperature gauges, which you don't have to worry about too much down here in Arizona. And we have the cylinder head temperature gauges, which is something that we do have to watch in this airplane. Over a long period of time of step taxiing, you'll notice these temperature gauges will get right up here by the red lines. And we may need to stop and idle taxi just for a little bit. Coming down to the throttle quadrant, Beechcraft is notorious for putting the throttles in the middle, which is where I believe they belong, but other people may argue that. We have our mixtures here, our throttles here, and our propellers here. These are manifold heat. They're laid out MH, and that's just old school for carburetor heat. Manifold heat, left engine and right engine. Okay. Coming down here, we have our aileron trim, and of course our flap lever here. And the flaps takes a little bit to get used to because there's an up, a down, and a middle position. So prior to takeoff, I might ask you for 15 degrees of flaps. We have a flap indicator here. Require you to go down and then stop, back to neutral position. And it takes a little while to get the hang of that, but it's not a real problem. Up, down, and neutral. The flaps are electric. Okay, so that was the manifold heat and the flaps we were just talking about. This airplane also has oil shutters. And cold weather, cold temperature, if you were having a hard time getting the engines to come up into the green, you would shut these oil shutters down, which basically shuts the air off that goes over the oil coolers. Kind of like a Venetian blind in your house. They come down and they just block off the air from the oil coolers. Now, if that's not enough and you're still not getting your temperature, the next thing to do would be to reach down here to the oil cooler bypasses. And you would actually pick up on this and pull these little valves up, which would bypass the oil coolers altogether. And by doing that, you're pretty well ensured that you're going to get some temperature back in the motors. Again, that's something that we don't worry about too much down here in Arizona, but in cold weather locations, that may be a factor. We also have oil shutoffs. These airplanes have dry sumps, so they have their own oil tanks. So in the event of an engine fire or something like that, you would want to pull up on these oil shutoffs and shut the oil off going to the engine, like maybe you broke an oil line or something like that. So you have a way to shut the oil off completely. Down here is our fire detection. We have left engine, we have right engine, and we have both. Okay, so in the event of an engine fire, you would select the engine that you had the problem with, and you would pull out on this little cable, which pops a little squib, I believe that's what they call it, and would blow a fire bottle and hopefully put the fire out in the engine. So that's basic cockpit layout. Now coming back up here to the instrument panel, it's just a standard VFR equipment. We've got our airspeed indicator, turn coordinator, and the heading indicator. Of course, it's not really in any kind of standard layout fashion. Again, something coming soon when we get our instruments in here for our ATPs. But anyhow, blue line in the airplane is 100 miles an hour. VMC in the airplane is 80 miles an hour. When we lift off the water, this airplane takes off at about 65 to 70. Because it's on floats, we're unable to accelerate to VMC or above like we would on wheels. So once we get airborne in this airplane, it's imperative to lower the nose and accelerate through VMC and get to blue line as soon as possible. Power settings for this airplane: on takeoff we use 36 inches. We bring it right up to the bottom of this red line. 35.5 actually for takeoff. And then once we get through VMC and we get blue line captured, we'll call for climb power. And climb power setting in this airplane is 32 inches and 2200 RPMs. Once we reach our cruise altitude, we'll back it off to 30 inches and 2000 RPMs. So those are some power settings you need to familiarize yourself with. 35.5 for takeoff, 32-22 for climb, 30-20 for cruise. And if you wanted to do an economy cruise, like if you were going on a long trip, we would maybe use 29 and 19. But for the most part, for training purposes, we'll be using the 30-20 power setting. Again, 35.5 inches for takeoff, 32-22 for climb power, 30-20 for cruise power setting. Okay, now on takeoff in this airplane, that's obviously the most critical phase of takeoff with pretty much any airplane. This airplane, like I said, takes off below VMC, so if we lose an engine on the takeoff roll, we're going to be pulling the power back, stopping, and aborting. After takeoff, once we're airborne, if we're airborne and not quite yet to VMC and we have an engine failure, we're going to be shutting the power down and landing straight ahead. Once we're through VMC and we're on our way to blue line, if we have an engine failure at that time, we're going to fly the airplane. We're going to start off with just the old-fashioned step on the ball. The ball never lies. So we're going to step on the ball, center the ball, level the wings. And we're going to run through our drill, which is going to be mixtures, props, full forward, mixtures, full rich, props, full forward, throttles, max power, which is what we call METO power. METO power is a max continuous power setting that we're going to use, and in this airplane it's actually 34.5 inches. So we'll set METO power. One thing to keep in mind when you're setting METO power, because we're down here at sea level on the Colorado River, it's possible that if you went full power on these throttles, you would overboost these engines and then possibly have two engines out. You've already lost one engine and then you killed your good engine by overboosting it. So you want to be nice and smooth on these power settings. So again, engine out procedure: step on the ball, level the wings, fly the airplane. Mixtures rich, props full forward, throttles METO power, 34.5 inches. Fly the airplane. Then we're going to come down here and wobble the wobble pump, because maybe we lost an engine-driven fuel pump. If that doesn't get us our engine back, we're going to go from the wobble pump to the flaps. Make sure that the flaps are up. We don't have to worry about landing gear because those have been removed. So it's a wobble pump and flaps up. Fly the airplane. Then we're going to come back and identify dead foot, dead engine, call it out, verify with a throttle, bringing a throttle back, and at that time we're going to feather. Now, with this particular airplane, it has feathering buttons, and they're up here and they're guarded. So you would unguard the feathering button, and you would push the button, which would activate an electric motor in there, which would pump the oil out of the prop and allow the prop to go to feather. Again, if we wanted to unfeather, we would just simply push the same button in, hold it in until we had 600 RPM on the tachometer, release the button, and the prop would be windmilling at that time, and we could do a restart with the mixture rich and the mags and everything else that we needed to get the motor running again. Okay, so that's engine out procedure. Basically 3 steps of 3. Mixtures, props, throttles, wobble pump, flaps up, identify, verify, and feather. And of course, all while we're doing this, we're maintaining blue line. And you'll hear me say that time and time again, maintaining blue line. When we lose an engine, we lose 50% of our horsepower, but we do lose 80 to 90% of our climb performance. So blue line basically is going to be nose on the horizon, or maybe just slightly above it. So when I say pitch for blue line, I'm meaning pitch for the horizon. Just basically level the airplane out, and it'll take care of itself. It'll stay there at blue line.